live Transitioning Humanitarians that we usually do with Vicky, and unfortunately Vicky cannot make it today. So that's why I'm continuing the conversation of toxic environments. And as you recall, we have been talking about roles of different people in that toxic environment. We started with people who are actually, we consider toxic people, who they are, and how do we know they are the ones who are toxic, the way that many of us tend to define in that humanitarian sector. And then we talked about the victim of the toxic environment. And today we want to talk about the role of observers. And the next one will be talking about mediators and other roles in that environment. So if we talk about the role of observers today, here are the several things that I really wanted to give your a framework to work with. Is I have seen and I have heard from so many different humanitarians that there are three type of observers, at least, that we can categorize, so that we have our better understanding of what are the specific types that we're talking about, and then what can we do about those roles, if depending on which category we find ourselves in, right? And by the way, I really also want to invite you all to my webinar that I'm hosting tomorrow to talk about fear of conflict, which I think is one of the main reasons also that we tend to have a lot of impunity in toxic environments, is because we fear that if we get involved and if we do something, then we will worsen the situation, we'll create more destruction, or we'll create more problems for ourselves. And that's why we tend to not do anything about those situations, and we continue having that observer role. And I'll be dive into more, but tomorrow in the webinar I will be talking specifically about that topic and what can we do individually to work through those fears if they are not really bringing us the outcomes that we would like to, or if the fear is intervening in being the persons that we want to in such environments, or any environment that we find ourselves. So let's come back to the topic of observers' roles in toxic environments. I have seen at least three different ways that observers can be, let's say, categorized. One is observer being close to the peer role, or observers being also in the role of peer to someone who's going through tough times in that environment. Maybe it's the person who's listening a lot of what's happening to the victim, right? A lot of the complaining, a lot of the frustrations, disappointments, all of this that the victim of the environment, or of a particular toxic person's behavior, the victim is then coming to tell this observer a lot about this, or therefore the observer has more information from that conversations, right? So that could be one category of people in that environment. The other category of people might be observers of overall situations. So the example that I can think of is when, let's say that we're all in a staff meeting, we are all gathered together to discuss something. Maybe it's the annual report that we need to write all together, or maybe it's the mid-year report that we need to write together, or other decisions that we need to make. And we all came together to discuss that, and then someone starting to shout or fighting with someone else, and then everyone else as observers looking at that scene and feeling uncomfortable, right? Feeling like I don't really want to be in this situation, but I am, and already feeling so impacted by that scene. And then later, how we show up and what contributions we make, what we say, what we don't say, they somehow are influenced by that person's behavior. Especially if that person is in a senior position, then it may affect us as observers sitting around the table and then feeling like, okay, maybe then it's better that I don't say these things, or maybe better that I say things in a different way, whatever it is, right? So that's another way of that we somehow find ourselves observer, but at the same time, victim of that environment. The third one is the observer of being the victim, maybe even directly, in the sense, the example that I will give you is that, let's say that you have been supporting the colleague who has been going through tough times, or who has been reporting this misconduct to the relevant units in the organization, and you have been supporting that person, and the person with the toxic behavior who is a considered perpetrator in that environment, then seeing you being the supporter of that victim, then seeing you also as the enemy, or seeing you as a troublemaker, or seeing you as someone who's just getting together to go against that person, right? So that's the another way that like somehow we turn from being an observer to a victim of that environment. So as you can see that even if many of us may believe that observer role is a neutral role, or a person who just observes and is not engaged, but oftentimes in toxic environments, I believe it's so difficult not to be engaged or not to be affected by it, right? So once we understand, and the reason why I'm saying this like more specifically as to what role you find yourself in, is for you to then start seeing the effects of that on your own emotional health, and on your own way of showing up in that environment, right? Because as observers, many of us may believe that, oh, it doesn't concern me, or it's something that I'm not really so involved in, and therefore I can just continue doing my work. And I think in some ways maybe we intended well, right? But at the same time, I really want you to think about what is the impact of that, like emotionally, on yourself, on you, how it affects you, and see if that's how you want to be affected. And the other thing that I really want to encourage you to think about is what things you could be doing in that environment to reducing that toxicity in that environment, right? That's the really main reason why I want to specify this, because I really want to like talk about several reasons why observers could have powerful roles, but I think oftentimes because we have this belief that it doesn't concern me, or if I get involved then things will get worse, or it may affect my career advancement, or whatever it is that we fear, those fears actually can create more of the impunity in that environment, I find, because as observers, we are usually many, and as many people, we have more power and more voice if we all, or most of us, advocated for the justice, or advocated for equality in the workplace, or advocated against misconduct in the workplace. Then there is the likelihood of us being able to change something so much more than one of us trying to do that, right? So that's why I really wanted to dedicate this episode to thinking about benefits of us continuing advocating for reduction, or even removal of misconduct, how we can do that as observers, and why we would want to do that. This is what I really wanted to talk about, because once we understand what role we could play, then we could maybe have more power to do something because of the community, or because of the team spirit that could go even high up. And we could, as like many people, we could influence the behavior of that one person, or of that one specific situation. So if you are an observer, and if you're thinking, why would I do this, right? Why would I get engaged or involved in this when it doesn't concern me. And I hear you. I have been in that place many times. And the things that I really want you to consider are these ones, is that we as humanitarians want to advocate for equal rights, right? We as humanitarians want to advocate for justice. We as humanitarians want to advocate against impunities, against injustices, inequalities. And if we're doing that outside with other people, or protecting their rights, or making sure things work in the way that they can access their rights, if we're doing that, and that's our most of our not only job titles, but that's we are like convinced, and we are motivated to do that work because that was the reason why we got into the humanitarian work, right? So if we're doing that, then not doing that with our own colleagues, not standing for our own colleagues that they are going through this, and not standing with them and trying to do something about that situation, would create more inequality, I find. More, it would show us somehow that we're not really more in integrity with ourselves, right? This is how I'm thinking about it, is that if we are there to protect rights of other people and want to create those justices that we want, then if we have the office that is going through injustices in so many different ways because of one or several people, then why, as observers, or why, as other colleagues who are witnessing this, why wouldn't we do something about it? Right? Because it's also in our own integrity to do something about it. It's also in our own interest to do something about it, because if one person is affected, then eventually other people will be affected as well. It's also the reason how we can actually show that we are standing for what we say we're standing. And when we do that, we also increase the team spirit. And I think that's the best team exercise that we can ever do as a team, or as a community of humanitarians who are going through this. The best exercise that we can do is when we stand for each other, when we see one of us is going through these injustices, right? And that would be a great reason to do that, to advocate for not committing that misconduct, to advocate for the toxic person not to continue this behavior, to advocate against impunity. We could all do those works, do those speak up actions, and many other actions maybe we can take, which I will be talking in a minute. We can all do that for those reasons. And then what's the other reasons that I love is that we feel more proud that we have done it, like for ourselves and for the other person. We feel more in line with our cause that we're fighting for, right? We feel more in line, instead of just entertaining that fear, or instead of just keep fearing even more, keep increasing that fear, or keep trying to take us away from the situation, hoping that it doesn't touch us. That doesn't feel good, I think. It doesn't feel good for so many levels, but one of them is probably because we know that this is not right. We know that it's not just, right? So, and the fact that we're not doing anything about it makes us feel even worse, I think. Because the other thing that I'm thinking about is that misconduct that we talked about. So, it could be abuse of power, favoritism, angry behaviors, right? So, when we are talking about those situations, those are verbal abuse, right? Someone is verbally abusing someone else. Now, if those things are happening, and if it was a physical abuse, we would intervene it immediately, I assume, right? If we see physical abuse, we would intervene immediately. And the reason why we don't often intervene when it's verbal abuse is, I think, because we don't think of them as the equal level of abuse. And if that's the case, then why don't we think of them as equal abuse? Think about it. And the other thing is, if we see that someone is being verbally abused, why wouldn't we stand and do something or say something and speak up? Right? Now, let's say that you have decided, yes, I want to do something about it, but I don't really know how, or I don't really know what to do, and what would require me of to actually speak up. Because for many of us, speaking up may not be an easy thing to do, and that's, I totally understand it. I have been there in so many occasions. I have found myself feeling like I'm a coward. I can't really speak up. I wanted to, but I have also been in rooms where other people spoken up. And I really admired those people. I was like, man, I'm so happy that we have those people who are saying certain things and speaking up, and immediately having this effect of stopping something and stopping that behavior, right? So therefore, let's dive in into what we can do in that situation. And please don't hear me wrong that I'm asking every one of you to be advocating and speaking up, because every one of our comfort level, confidence level, level of advocacy is different, right? So that's why it's up to you to judge and understand yourself best to what can you do in that moment, what would be something that you would like to do that you haven't been able to do. So these are the things you can get your mind to. So here are my suggestions for you to consider, is that if you are, again, in the observer peer role, meaning this, or observer support role, where you're supporting the person who's going through this, is absolutely one way is to listen and be compassionate and having that space for that person to get and vent all the things out, right? That's absolutely amazing. If you are that trusted person, giving that space is amazing. But also, what tends to often happen is that victims going through these things, they tend to um, not only need support, but also maybe certain ways to confirm if they're really hearing this right, or if they are really understanding this is actually discrimination, or this is favoritism, or this is abuse of power. They may need soundboard to confirm certain things, and that's maybe another thing that you can do, being that soundboard with the victim. Excuse me. The other thing that you can do is understanding where that victim's status, maybe suggest to seek other help or suggest to report that behavior. These are the things absolutely I think we as peers can do as well. But what is something that maybe you haven't considered that you could absolutely explore is also, especially the victim being in this situation that's very difficult to go through, right? And you as an observer or support role, you could be the person who could also remind and say that the victim has so much power to do something about it, to directly solve this problem if she or he is in a position to do that. Exploring these options, I think, is so important as well, because in the victim position, we often get into this powerless feeling, and therefore it's important to understand and recognize and regain our power back. Right? So, in regaining that power, observer support role can be maybe very powerful to do that. Now, in the observer of overall situation, I have seen many ways to act on it. I have seen where people have collectively written letters to the senior management to do something about it. That can be maybe something that you can consider. Talking to staff association could be another way that you can consider, right, beside reporting. But the other one that I think that the way that I have experienced in my own humanitarian work, the way that I think is the most powerful is directly in the meeting, let's say that this verbal abuse or fighting is occurring in the meeting, and I have seen that some of the senior people in the around the table making a stop to this behavior by saying something like, I don't think this is a constructive way of discussing things. It's not going to lead us to anywhere. So that's why let us calm down and then get to a constructive way of discussing things, or let's take a pause and then come back. Or if someone is trying to attack someone else, also saying something like, I don't think attacking or blaming will help us in this situation. If there are certain things that you personally want to discuss, please do, but let us not affect everyone around the table with this emotional discussions that unfortunately don't always bring to the outcomes that we want, right? So this might be one of the ways to intervene that can then stop the behavior, right? That could be one way. And I have seen this in some of the meetings and I was impressed how effective that was. And I think the way that I would like for you to all think about is for you to say that, for you to advocate, what do you need to feel in that moment? What do you need to believe about yourself to be able to say that? And also, what do you need to believe about the other person that they will also hear your message and stop their behavior? Because some of the ways that we try to do is we try to solve things directly, like this example that I just said, or indirectly, right? Indirectly meaning reporting it, writing to others, maybe having conversations behind the closed doors, whatever it is. And oftentimes I have seen that the most effective is when we directly address it to the person. And in order to be able to address it directly to the person, obviously the person who's talking, in this case, the observer of the overall situation, that observer needs to not have that fear that all of his, her reputation or success in career depends on the other person, right? Because I think one of the fear that we have, which is very legitimate, is we believe that if I speak up, then I will be having like bad relationships later with this person. I will create more problems, and therefore it will affect my career or it will affect my relationship in the future. And therefore, because of that fear, we don't speak up. But the problem is that the more we fear, the more we generate impunity, right? And we know that. I think I don't need to say that without like, you all know that. And that's why, in order to understand and recognize our fear at the same time, like deciding what's that fear is costing us, what's that fear is creating. And if we collectively, or most of the people who are as observers, could do something together, and without fear or with fear, do something together, then imagine how we would create the space that we like living, or sorry, like working in, instead of just tolerating or avoiding the toxic person's behavior. And the third one is that I was talking about is observer in the victim role. And here I would say that the one of the main things becomes is what what do we feel like we are capable of doing at that moment? Do we want to something about it? Do we want to address it? Like I said, I keep advocating for addressing it directly with people. But in order to do that, I also understand that many of us need to have this feeling of trust that we can do this without creating further problems. Trust that we are able and capable of doing that, and even if it doesn't go the way that we want to. Still, we trust that our work and our reputation speak for itself. Therefore, we don't need to fear that particular person. And those are the work that many of us may do if we haven't done it. And therefore, like bringing ourselves to that place where we are ready to speak up and say the things directly in the best possible way, and trying to clarify things directly without creating further problems. But then, if we feel like that's not going to solve, then what other most effective things we can do? Because oftentimes, when we are in such situations, we often then start having a lot of this feeling of nothing will work, nothing will change anything. It will continue this way, and it will continue worsening it. And when we get into those type of feelings and we keep generating those feelings, then that will just keep affecting our belief in what we're doing. It will keep affecting our belief in overall of the situation, right? And we even kill our desire and motivation to be working and advocating, because we feel like if we can't really do something in our own environment where everyone is, in theory at least, should be advocating for the equality, for justices, and yet we're creating a lot of injustices within our own teams or within our own organization, then how would we really be effective in fighting for justices outside, right? And these are all of those feelings will come up, and then we just don't want to do the work, or we do it just because we have to. And then we get into this, a lot of this demotivating space. And if we don't want to be in that space, then at least the small things, the smallest steps, or depending on what you feel like your capacity is in that moment, taking something or making some, doing something towards reducing that environment, towards supporting that person, towards being part of the team who speaks up against, being part of that, I think makes the change. Instead of just telling ourselves, oh, I just fear and I can't do this, or nothing works, and then we can't, like, it doesn't make sense. And all of this then makes us into this demotivating and like low draining place, and then it's difficult to get out of it, right? So that's why my advocacy here really is, think about, as an observer of toxic environment, what are the most effective things you could do, and in order to do that, what will require of you, meaning how do you need to feel, how do you need to formulate, how do you need to think about these things, how do you want to, and then what are the smaller steps you can take, or the bigger steps, depending on how you feel in that moment. But always trying to think about, what if I could be the person who advocates for justices everywhere? It doesn't matter if it's the office, it doesn't matter if it's this person, or it doesn't matter if it's the person who's affected by the war. I will be always advocating for the justices, and certain misconduct I don't want to be part of, and I want to say the things or speak up, even if I feel fear, even if it feels uncomfortable, because it's important to me. We can always go to that place, and I would love to invite you to work on this, so that we can really work together to do our portion of the work to reduce toxic environments. So, my dears, thank you so much for being with me and listening to me. And I would love to hear from you, your thoughts, your feedback, and of course, let me know if you need coaching on this. I would love to coach you as well. Have a beautiful week. I'll speak to you, this Vicky, next week.